almost like I had heard a voice say, you need to set the fastest known time on the PCT. Just don't confuse creation with the creator. One of the nice things about the amount of time I spend in nature is there's the constant reminder of death and life. Somebody who's jaded about the goodness of humanity, go through hiking. Nature is not benevolent. You don't want to carry anything that's heavier than you have to.
Welcome to the Impact Nations podcast. My name is Tim. I am your host. And this week, I am joined by one of my newest friends. Her name is Heather Anderson, and she's the author of this book, Thirst, 2,600 Miles to Home. And I met Heather in Uganda just a few weeks ago. And when I found out that she had written a book, I was like, will you please come on our show and talk to our listeners about it? And she was crazy enough to say yes, perhaps before she knew me a little better. But Heather, thank you for being brave enough to come on the Impact Nations podcast. It's great to have you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's great to be on here. And yes, I did agree to that before I got to know you very well. So
Indeed,
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. You may have regretted it since then, but I appreciate that your word is your bond.
Yes, I try.
Could you just tell us, well, I don't know if you should tell us, because honestly, we tried getting this out of you a few times while we were hanging out with you. But you're a very modest person, I'm going to say, but you are a very accomplished thru hiker. And I would say an elite athlete, having seen some of your accomplishments. Can you just tell us what is a thru hiker? Maybe just start with that, because we're going to define our terms, because we, believe it or not, this is not actually a hiking podcast. So we're talking to hiking neophytes. They don't know what we're talking about. I don't even know what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So a thru hiker or thru hiking most simply just means hiking the entirety of a trail, like all in one season, like start to finish. And most typically that refers to long distance hiking trails, things like the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, maybe the Colorado Trail, things like that, things that are several hundred miles long, not, you could technically thru hike anything, but usually it doesn't, refer to anything less than 100 or 200 miles.
So I'm out. Forget it. I'm disqualified immediately. You lost me at 100 or 200 miles. But this book in particular, it says it right in the title, 2,600 miles to home. That's a long hike. What trail was that?
Yeah, so that's the Pacific Crest Trail. And it's 2,600 miles from the Mexican border, just outside San Diego, up to the Canadian border, just outside of Vancouver.
2,600 miles from Mexico to Canada. Why on earth would you get it into your head that you should hike 2,600 miles? And you've actually done it twice.
3 times.
3 times? Oh my goodness.
Well, I mean, there is like this whole like through hiking culture. People that do these multi-thousand-mile long trails, or these couple 100-mile long trails. And the 3 kind of primary long distance trails in the US are the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. And all of those are over 2,000 miles long. And
wow.
Within that through hiking culture, like if you do all 3 of those, that's called the triple crown of backpacking, or the triple crown of through hiking. And so it's kind of a thing to do that. And I didn't know any of this when I started hiking. I didn't grow up hiking or backpacking or doing anything outdoors related. But when I was a senior in high school, we can talk about how old I am here. I had a class on how to use this new invention called the internet. And so we had to go on to the internet, and I don't even remember exactly the parameters, but we had to find a news article that was interesting to us online and then write a short paper about it. So I guess basically just how to research on the internet was the point. And I don't know how I found this, but somehow I stumbled across an article about a man who had walked from he had walked from Georgia to Maine on the Appalachian Trail. And I was just blown away by the fact that somebody could walk 2,000 miles through the mountains, like carrying a backpack, and decided right then and there that sounded like a grand adventure and I wanted to do it. And I was this overweight bookworm that never did anything athletic. So I don't know why I decided that sounded like a great idea. But then when I graduated college, I hiked the AT as it's known amongst hikers. And along the way, I discovered that there were these other long distance trails, and that's what led me to continue hiking.
And we'll jump into the Pacific Crest Trail in a minute here. But there's another thing that's very interesting about your community that I learned when I got to know you, which is that you guys all have nicknames for each other. You have a hiker name. It's
Mhm.
It kind of reminds me of my friends who are in the Orthodox Church, who when they get baptized, they get a new name.
Right.
It's similar,
Yes,
I think.
yeah, it's not a saint name though.
No.
I mean, it could be if you want, but
Um,
yeah,
and you throughout this book, you're referring to people like there's Pringles, there's Flip Flop, there's all these different people.
right.
But you've got a beautiful hiker name, trail name. Is it trail name? Is that how you say
Trail
it?
name.
Trail
Yeah.
name, which is Anish. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Can
That's
you
my
tell
trail
us
name.
about the origin of your name, Anish?
Sure. So these trail names came about, I believe, on the Appalachian Trail at some point in the past, just because, believe it or not, there are thousands and thousands of people who do this every year,
Wow.
even though it sounds crazy. And it came about kind of as a way to, differentiate, how many Mikes there will be, or how many Tims, or Bills, or Bobs. Like there's going to be lots.
Yeah.
And so you would just get like a, Cincinnati Bill, or whatever. Like you'd get a trail name. And it kind of just evolved from there and kind of just became this rite of passage on especially the Appalachian Trail, and then it kind of spread to the other long distance trails. Um, so having a trail name is just kind of, I mean, not everybody will get one, but I'd say like 99% of hikers will get a trail name. And usually it's given to you by the people you're hiking around,
Mhm.
most often for something stupid that you did, but not always. Some people will name themselves. Sometimes it's just like, a name that's like descriptive. And I chose to name myself on my first hike because I started the day after I graduated college. So I started really much later than most hikers are started. So I wasn't seeing anybody. And I was like, maybe I'm never going to see anyone. And I wanted a trail name. So I decided to give myself the trail name Anish, which is short for Anishinaabe. And my great great grandmother was Anishinaabe, and that's the Native American peoples of the upper Midwest in Canada. So I took the trail name to honor that part of my heritage and to honor her. And so um, I just was known as Anish on the trail ever after.
And then you picked up another nickname along this particular trail that we'll talk
Yes,
about in a
I
few
have two trail
minutes.
names.
Yes, indeed. But let's talk about the subject of this book in particular. You set out to break a record. Uh,
Mhm.
there was a record held by, forgive me, I've forgotten the gentleman's name who held it before you. Um,
Scott
but
Williamson,
Scott Williamson, and he had hiked that trail in 62 days. Is that right? Um,
64.
64 days. And you
Mhm.
set out to break that record. You did a lot of research and set up your spreadsheets and everything and figured out you needed to be hiking over 40 miles a day
Mhm.
in order to do it. What got it in your head? When was that seed planted that you wanted to set a record? And why was it important to you?
So it's actually kind of a long journey from when the seed was planted to when I actually did it. So the first time I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail was in 2005. And when I was out there that year, well, let me just talk about fastest known times very briefly. So
Mhm.
these records are known as fastest known times, and that has now kind of become its own sport. And basically, it's all about just, and if anybody that listens is familiar with Strava, it's kind of like you're, being I think it's called the king of a segment or king of a hill or something. It's basically just like, the fastest amount of time, anybody can do a certain trail or route. And it's
Mhm.
not something that is really anything to do with through hiking. It's its own thing. But there is a history of people doing it on these long distance trails as well. And there's a couple of different ways to approach it. One is to be fully supported with a crew and people carrying your stuff for you and meeting you with a car and food. And, you're just basically running mostly, or power hiking, and you don't really have anything with you. Or there's like doing it kind of the self-supported way or the through hiker style, which is where you're backpacking it and you are just sufficient in and of yourself. You're not receiving outside help along the way. And so in 2005, when I was hiking the PCT the first time, when I was in the Sierra in Central California, a man who was attempting to set the supported fastest known time on the PCT passed me. And that was like kind of the first person to really do a fastest known time on the PCT. And I remember my hiking partner and I, after that, talked a lot about like, oh, I wonder how fast we could hike the trail and, what kind of, what you'd have to do. And I mean, it was just kind of a topic of conversation because you get tired of the same old thing when you're just stuck in the woods with somebody for, 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
So this was something new to talk about. And, kind of in the course of that, we also discussed that like, women seem to get, stronger and stronger. Men often lose a lot of weight and become kind of weak towards the end of a 2,000-mile hike. And maybe women would be really good at doing these long distance hikes really quickly. And so there was kind of that discussion, and then mostly just kind of forgot about it. And then in 2012, so quite a few years later, I had had a lot of things. My life had kind of just been upended. And ultimately what I had done is I had quit my job and gone out, and I was just hiking 1,000 miles of the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail. I just bought a one-way bus ticket and like was going to walk back to where I was living at the time along the trail, because I was living in Washington State. And just because I needed to get back into the woods and kind of get my head straight after a lot of things that happened in my life. And it was in the process of doing that hike that I was sleeping one night in my tent, and I just woke up almost like I had heard a voice say, you need to set the fastest known time on the PCT. And it was just this like, where did that come from moment? But yet, and it was like, at the same time, I was like, that's what I'm going to do. So even though I was didn't have any idea like how to go about doing this, I didn't necessarily think I could do it. It seemed very terrifying to me. I'd never really hiked like that before. I was running longer distances, like I had run some ultra marathons, but it wasn't like I was running an ultra marathon day after day after day, which is basically what this attempting to do the whole Pacific Crest Trail in like less than 64 days would really require me to do, 40 plus miles a day every day, like never taking a day off, and, carrying my full backpack and, dealing with everything that came along the way. So it was very intimidating. But the next year I went out and did it because I felt like I had to. I felt like I needed to. I felt like it was something I needed to do, even though I didn't have a firm, good reason why. It was just like, this is what I need to do.
If you don't mind us getting a little bit into some of that personal turmoil, because you get into it in the book. I mean, right in near the beginning of the book, you say, I'm quoting here, a half decade I spent trying to conform to society was a charade. You really go into some depths here about the struggle that you'd had in life to be somebody that ultimately you discovered you were not, that you felt like society was requiring something of you that ultimately was not reasonable in a sense. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how that's transformed over the years, and do you feel more liberated from that pressure now?
Yeah, there was definitely like, so I was 18 when I found out that the Appalachian Trail existed, and I was 21 when I hiked it. So it was very early in my life that, I went and did this, as I call it, the grand adventure. I hiked the Appalachian Trail. And it was always just kind of this thing of like believing that I'm going to go do this thing, and then I'm going to go back to like living life in the normal pattern. I'm going to like get married and buy a house and have a career and have kids and do all of the things that were, kind of expected of me. And when I was on that trail, I was like, well, like for the first time in my life, first time in my life, I liked doing something athletic. Like I hated doing anything that would make me sweat. I was not a fan. I was not a runner at that time. Like I couldn't even run around the track. Just like did not, it was so like out of like the box for me to
Yeah.
do this thing. But after like the first like week or so out there on the trail, I had this realization that it was like the happiest I'd ever been in my life. It was the most fulfilled I had ever been in my life. Everything just felt right.
Yeah.
And I just decided like this is what I want to spend my life doing, even though it sounds very irrational. I want to spend my life hiking. I want to spend my life in the woods. I want to spend my life in nature. Um, and there really wasn't a way for me to monetize that or explain to my parents why I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And then so of course I had found out about those other two long distance trails that make the Triple Crown. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just hike the Triple Crown. And so I did, over the next couple of years, I finished, those three trails. I'm like, okay, well, now I've done 3 grand adventures and it's time to conform or whatever. And so I got married and I got a job um and it was the next like, I don't know, 6 years or so were like some of the worst years of my life. I was absolutely miserable because it wasn't it wasn't my calling. And I feel like that's kind of the thing. And not everybody believes in this sort of thing. But, that night when I was laying in my tent and I like literally heard a voice say, you need to set the record on this trail. It's like, that's literally like, I felt like this moment of calling, like you've forgotten like what you should do with your life. You are supposed to spend it in the woods. And so, the whole, time I was on the PCT, the whole duration of what's covered in my book, Thirst, is me coming to terms with that calling and then being like willing to commit to that and be like, well, right, well, I am going to figure out a way to make this my life because this is what I need to do. Like, this is, what makes me feel fulfilled. This is what makes me happy. This is where I feel a sense of purpose and wholeness. And yeah, so from that time, from finishing that trail, there hasn't really been any looking back. And I mean, I've gone down a lot of side paths trying to figure out how to make that work. But ultimately, I knew by the time I finished that hike that that is what I have to do with my life, and that is what I'm meant to do. And so, yeah, I don't have a lot of, I don't have that mixed emotion now where I feel like I should be doing something that I'm not.
I mean, you were studying theology at the time, and like when you were a college student, and then when you first discovered hiking was in the Grand Canyon, which, by the way, an extraordinary story. Like, you hiked the Grand Canyon barefoot, effectively. I think you were wearing an ankle brace and some duct tape by the end.
Right.
Quite an extraordinary story, but it was in those moments you were actually serving, I think, in an internship or something like that at a mission at the Grand Canyon at the time. And when you went back to college, basically I had to tell your theology prof, like, I, I've experienced God in a way that I haven't before, that was so much more real to me. And I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I think that's kind of how I've understood what you've written here. Um, how was that received when you came back and said, I've experienced God different than I anticipated, and I want to pursue that instead?
Yeah. No, you're not really putting words in my mouth. That is, kind of how it felt because that was the first time I went hiking. So the Appalachian Trail a couple years later was the first time I did a through hike. But first time I went hiking was when I was at the Grand Canyon, and you know, I just fell in love with it. It was just this, this beautiful experience, and it is what kind of led me to actually doing the Appalachian Trail. It's this grand adventure, and like I love hiking so much. Like this, I wasn't backpacking, but I was hiking, and so and I just remember, yeah, like I was a religious studies major in college, and I came back, and my advisor, I had done yeah, this was like an internship with a Christian ministry in the national park. And I remember coming back and telling him, like, I don't know that I want to go into the ministry anymore. I don't know that I want to go into missions work. Um, I feel like I need to do something like this. I need to spend time in nature. Like this has been, different. And, he was actually very receptive to it. And I will just never forget, he was like, just don't confuse creation with the creator.
Mm,
And that was what he said. And I was like,
wow.
that's that, and I needed to hear that for sure.
Yeah.
Just to be like not told, okay, well, you're crazy. You know, he was
Yeah.
like, he was accepting, and yeah, I will
Yeah.
always appreciate that.
Hmm. Do you find that you are often, I mean, you encounter incredible beauty when you, and the way you describe it is beautiful here too. I feel at times that I'm right there on the trail with you. But as you're beholding the beauty of creation, where does that leave you in terms of those reflections, in terms of what he said, in terms of, hey, don't confuse creation with the creator and things like that? Like, where does your mind go as you're reflecting on the beauty that is all around you?
You know, I think that most of the time I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful for um, the chance to experience it, the chance to see it. I'm grateful for its existence. I'm grateful for the appreciation of it. You know, I think that I've been really blessed in life to see so many places and so many things that most people will never see or experience, or they'll only see pictures of. And um, I just have this immense gratitude for the experiences I've had, and you know, it's also this great humility to feel like part of creation and part of this whole landscape. Um, I don't feel like I don't belong there. I think a lot of people feel like they're outsiders when they go into nature or whatever. And for me, I feel very much part of the landscape and part of the whole. And I get that I was mentioned earlier, a sense of wholeness that I feel out there. I feel my place in nature when I'm out there.
Even when it's trying to kill you? Because there are times that it sounds like you were on death's door.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, you know, nature is not benevolent. You know, nature is what it is. Um, so and in the, we know we're all gonna die. So and I think that that's one of the nice things about the amount of time I spend in nature is there's the constant reminder of death and life and rebirth, and that everything's in balance. That's all around you all the time when you're
Yeah.
out there.
You talk about a community because you're very often you're all alone. Most of the time you're all alone. And you did this as an unsupported through hiker, you're trying to set this record. And yet the community that you describe along the way really surprised me, actually. Like, and there are like literal support systems in place. There's a whole world that I had no idea about. Like you can mail yourself to specific spots along the trail. You can mail yourself a box. You've got a clever way of labeling that box, decorating it in such a way that they can find it quickly on the shelf, things like that. But a box
Mhm.
full of supplies, and there's so many places along the trail where you can gain physical support in terms of a place to shower and get some fresh clothes and open your
Mhm.
box and get the next few days worth of rations and things. And also just emotional support in terms of just people cheering you on and things like that. Um, what's it like to be a part of a community where you can feel so isolated for days at a time, but know that, maybe in another day or two, you're gonna reconnect with humanity?
And that was one of the things that I really loved about through hiking when I went onto the Appalachian Trail that first time, you know, because I was expecting it to be completely solitary and that sort of thing. And very quickly realized that it is just like this community of people, and not just the hikers. I mean, the hikers are all, supportive, and they take care of each other and things like that. But there's also like this community around the trail. These like, we call them trail angels, people that will just like
Mhm.
help hikers out, with no request for money or any compensation of any sort. And there's also businesses and things like that that, support hikers or are there for hikers, hold boxes, resupply boxes, or, whatever. And so it's just interesting. And what I've seen over and over throughout my years doing these long hikes is that um, there are, like, if you are somebody who's jaded about the goodness of humanity, go through hiking,
Hmm.
because there will be so many people that are so good to you, that are complete strangers that you don't even know, that they just see a need and they help you. It will completely restore your faith in humanity. I've had so many people over the years, like absolute strangers, and they have helped me out immensely.
You've got one story where you yourself were very selfless. Like there are times along the trail where you suddenly meet up with somebody that you know, which is to me is shocking that like on this 2,600-mile trail that is really much of it is in the middle of nowhere, and you suddenly stumble upon some hiker that you actually know. And
Hmm.
at one point you're hiking with I think it's a guy named Pringles,
Hmm.
and he decides he's got to finish his day. His day is going to be done. He doesn't have food. He's going to hitchhike back to town. And you actually give him your dinner for that day, even though you've got another like 10 or 15 miles to hike because you
Hmm.
know what you've got to do to set this record. And it just was incredibly selfless. And I see so many selfless acts in here. And I couldn't help but be reminded of Jesus' teachings, where he's teaching us sacrificial love. And I just wonder, like, how often do you, it sounds like pretty regularly you're seeing this self-giving love in this community. And I
Hmm.
wonder if the world would be a better place if we actually took Jesus' words seriously and really actually just gave up our own rights, our own preferences in order to serve others. And it sounds like you guys as a community are doing pretty well at that.
I think so. Yeah, the thru hiking community at large is overall a very giving and accepting community.
You held this record. You made it. You did it in 60 days and some hours, I think is what it says at the
Hmm.
end of the book. But along that way, you were battling your internal voices of negativity. I think probably some of those voices from the past that had told you couldn't do it or wouldn't amount to anything. Plus, along the way, you tell us a few times that you checked online and there are always a few haters because, the internet.
Right.
Um, how did you battle those internal and external voices of negativity in order to keep putting one step in front of the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as far as well, I guess it applies to both. I would always just come back to the fact that this was something I needed to do. Like I know this is something I need to do. This is what I'm called to do. Like this is like, and I just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other until I can't anymore or until I'm done. And I think that a lot of times, like, I mean, in general, we get off in our own heads a lot. And when a lot of times it all just comes down to just focusing on what's right in front of you and staying pretty present. And I think that that was something that happened a lot for me on that trail, was just coming back to like the present moment and just focusing on what I was doing right then, whether it was like hiking to the next water source or finding a place to camp or, just walking and enjoying the beauty around me. So just kind of coming back to that and just reminding myself that this is what I want to do, this is where I'm meant to be, and just be there.
Yeah, you broke down what was a massive goal into very bite-sized chunks, and like you say, just kind of what's the next thing, either that next water source, the next campsite, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's great wisdom in that. I mean, you never let go of your larger goal, but you didn't let it become a source of feeling overwhelmed or discouraged as though I'll never make it there. Instead, just what's the next milestone, so to speak. Um,
Right.
I also have to say, Heather, I was greatly blessed to discover that one of the main staples food sources for a thru hiker is Oreo cookies. I didn't realize that you get to eat junk food when you're hiking, but I suppose for you, you just talk about just caloric intake. You've just got to get
Mm-hmm.
calories in you. And so I thought, if it's just walking and eating Oreos, I think I could do this.
I mean, I feel like it makes it available to a lot of people, Little Debbie's, Pop Tarts, Oreos,
Boom.
and walking. I mean, yeah.
Ah, I love it. Um, you are a woman. You set this record. Were there people out there who were saying a woman can't do it? It can't be done. Do you feel like you got to say "booyah" when you cross that finish line?
I mean, there definitely were a lot of people who didn't think that a woman could do it. And they definitely um, were skeptical that a woman could break Scott's record. Scott has hiked the PCT more than anybody else. I think he's hiked the trail 13 times.
Hmm.
Um, it's not in my nature to say booyah, but I just do what I do, and um, people can observe it or not. So, but yeah, it was there was a lot of criticism and disbelief. I will say that. that
Yeah.
a woman could do this.
And you discovered it's very amusing. You kind of discovered slowly but surely over the course of many days that people were referring to you as the ghost.
Hmm.
And people started talking about the ghost, and you're like, who's the ghost? And then you realized, oh, it's me.
Yeah, yeah, that originated with people like trying to find me, and all they could find were my footprints because I was wearing a distinctive pair of shoes. And yeah, so I was like a ghost on the trail, and I didn't know who they were talking about. And then I realized it was me.
That's funny.
Yeah.
What was it like when you finally crossed that line into Canada? And by the way, a wonderful destination, folks. If you're going to set a destination, Canada's the one to set. Just saying. When you finally crossed that line into Canada, I'm guessing Border Patrol didn't suddenly swarm you or anything like that. But what was it like? Was it like what you expected? Was it different? How did you feel?
I'm not even sure if I had an expectation of what it would be like. I think for a lot of the trail, I wasn't even certain I was going to make it there. Uh, but it was one of the most emotional moments of my life for sure. Like there was this like, this sort of unrelenting drive to get there for so long. It's like the only thing you're working toward for, in this case, 2 months straight. And I just remember when I got there, I just like screamed at the top of my lungs and then started crying.
Hmm.
And then after like a minute of that, I was like, well, I guess I have to find a place to pitch my tent. Like back to
Suddenly,
business.
back to
Like,
business. Yeah.
because it was like midnight. So I was like, well, I need to
Yeah.
sleep somewhere. So
Is it just a trust thing? How do they know? Like, how do you guys hold each other accountable to like, I suppose you probably took photos at the beginning and the end, so they know how long it took you to get from one spot to the other and stuff. But is the whole community just built on how do they know you didn't just hop a plane to fly from San Diego to Seattle or something?
yeah, I mean, a good bit of it is trust, but I mean, I took a lot of pictures and posted them online along the way and wrote about, what I was doing. And
Yeah.
then I had a satellite beacon. So it's actually like a personal locator beacon, like more for like getting rescued if you are injured.
Mm,
But it's also a way like you can push the button, not the I need help button, but the other button
yeah.
that just like pings your location. And then that gets tracked on a map.
Yeah. So
And
it's just a
so
series of dots along the way of where you
yeah,
push the button. Yeah.
yeah. So
Amazing.
I recorded my hike using that. So
Yeah.
that was available afterward for
Yeah.
verification as well.
Mm. And since that time, you held that record for a long time. It has been surpassed since then, just in recent years. Is that right?
Yeah, two men have done it faster. One last year, 2023, or sorry, yeah, 2023 and 2024. No, 2023 and 2022. Yeah. So the last 2 years. There was one each year. Um, but yeah, I held it for 9 years. And there
Nine
hasn't been a
years.
woman that's done it faster. So I
Wow.
still hold the women's record.
Amazing. How did you feel when somebody finally beat you after 9 years? Somebody finally got it done faster. Did that hurt, or were you excited for him, or how'd you feel?
I mean, I was just surprised it took that long. Because I mean, in my head, like I still felt like, I mean, I'd never done something like that. I felt like there were so many things I had done poorly
Mhm.
that cost me time that
Yeah.
like it just was surprising that nobody had taken any time off of it faster, or I mean
Yeah.
sooner than that. But yeah, I was excited for him. I think that that's great. I love to see people out there like kind of pushing themselves, and I
Yeah.
know it was like a major journey of discovery for me. So I
Hmm.
hope that other people are also, I want other people to have that same experience. So
Yeah. Well, and Scott, whose record you broke, he actually met you on the trail at one point with some snacks and stuff, and was cheering you on, saying he hoped that you made it. So it sounds like, again, a very supportive community.
it is. Yeah. Scott's actually like, Scott and his wife are like some of my best friends now. So
Wow.
like, yeah, we hike together whenever I'm out in Washington, and yeah.
Fantastic. Well, folks, I would very much recommend this book to you. It's called Thirst, and we're going to talk about thirst in a few more minutes. But Thirst, 2,600 Miles to Home by Heather Anish Anderson, about her record-setting pace on the Pacific Crest Trail. And Heather, you and I are going to shift gears here in just a minute because I want to talk a little bit about how we met each other, and we're actually
Mhm.
going to bring in a bonus guest, a guest number 2, which I've not done this year on the podcast. I don't know if I've ever done on the podcast actually, so that'll be fun. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage for that, if I could. This is the Impact Nations podcast. I joked earlier that we're not actually a hiking podcast, but I'm learning all sorts of wonderful things about hiking. But the reason that I met Heather was because Heather and I were a part of a very small team doing the work of Impact Nations, this time in Uganda. And Impact Nations, we like to say we rescue lives with a really big gospel. We believe that the gospel of Jesus is about participating in the restoration of all things. It's not about religious activity. It's not about saying the right things, wearing the right things, behaving a particular way, but instead is about participating in restoring life to the way God created it to be in the first place. And so the way we do that at Impact Nations, our particular expression, is to go into the majority world, into developing nations, and literally bring rescue to people who are facing horrific circumstances. That's rescuing people from cyclical poverty. It's rescuing people from being human trafficked, from slavery, from sex work, from homelessness, gang activity. And teen pregnancy is another big one. And we come with a message of hope and say, hey, this isn't the way life was intended to be. And we bring practical rescue. We get people out of these situations, get them the shelter they need, the mentoring they need, the coaching, the care, just the emotional support that they need, but then also provide them with long-term skills, marketable skills that they're going to be able to take into the marketplace and flourish long-term so they can provide for themselves and their families. Very often, by the way, that means providing not just for like their generation, but oftentimes their parents and even younger siblings or their own children as well. And so that's what we do. We go into nations such as Uganda and Malawi, the Philippines, India, Nepal, rescuing people from these dangerous situations and providing them what they're going to need to flourish long term. And so it's a wonderful joy to be able to participate in that. We've got partners all over the world in these nations who we champion. We help them just grow their capacity and help them rescue even more lives every single year. So if that's something you'd like to learn more about, head to impactnations.com. And of course, it takes money to get that stuff done. If you'd like to give, you can just click on the donate button there. But more than anything, just check out the website, check out all the different things that are happening around the world. It is just so inspiring to read some of these stories of these mostly young women, but other young men as well, who have faced insurmountable odds, not unlike some of the death-defying situations that Heather's found herself in, but really these folks have been taken advantage of, have been told that they are no good, that they do not deserve dignity, and yet they discover dignity because generous donors such as yourselves give all over the world and help us get the job done. So check that out at impactnations.com. All right, we are back, and we've got a very special treat for our viewers, our listeners today, because we've actually got a second guest joining us for part 2 of this interview. Very excited to invite one of my other brand new friends, Whitney, but he goes by Allgood. That is his trail name. Allgood, welcome to the Impact Nations podcast. So glad you could join us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Heather and I have been having a great chat about her book here, Thirst.
Mm-hmm.
And
Great book.
it is a great book. And one of the things that struck me very quickly as I was reading the book, Heather, is that why you called it Thirst. Because the first, I don't know, third of the book, as you're in Southern California, I don't know, you nearly died of thirst multiple times. It hadn't occurred to me that as you are hiking, probably your first thought of every single day is just, okay, where's my next source of water coming from? Can you guys just talk about, as hikers, what's it like to always be wondering where's your next drink coming from?
Yeah, it's definitely a big aspect of planning and logistics. And, it's a little easier now that there's a lot of online like smartphone apps that you can use that have waypoints for water sources. So that it has made it a lot easier, but definitely in the past, you had to rely on maps, guidebooks, like on the PCT, there was like a water report that was online, but it would get outdated really quickly. And so you just kind of always are, especially in a dry area, like a desert, you're always kind of in the back of your mind, like, emphasis are going to be water up ahead? Like, should I take more water from here? Like, and you kind of plan your day around it, like where you're going to camp, how far you have to walk, so you're set up to reach the next water source. Sometimes you're rationing your water. Sometimes you're even deciding like, well, I don't have enough water to cook dinner tonight, so I had to eat Oreos for dinner, because I don't have enough water. Yeah, it's, whatever, how that you can live like, 3 days without water or something like that. Like, it is like very much essential, and you realize how essential water is when you're doing these long distance hikes. And it's one of the things that, when people are like, oh, what do you miss when you're on the trail? And I am like, being able to turn a knob and there is all the clean water that I could possibly want,
And
like,
hot water.
and hot water. Yeah. Hot water and
Yeah.
cold water on demand, the ability to have
Yeah.
whichever one I want, because when it's really cold on the trail, you want hot things. And when it's hot on the trail, you want cold things, and you usually can't have them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would even say, a lot of the routes I've done in the last 5 years of my life have been a lot more off trail or way off the beaten path kind of stuff. I mean, ground truth, a couple of different hikes over the last couple of years. And, water, like Heather said, you're spending your entire day kind of planning your logistics around where are we going to get our next water. And then what's even worse than that is knowing a lot of times they're going to ground truth the trail, like a new trail. It's like, just because it shows there's water on this map, no one's ever been there this time of year. We have no idea. So then it's this constant game of like, well, how much water capacity should I carry? Water is really heavy. It's probably it's the heaviest consumable product we put in our backpacks that we carry all day. 4 liters of water weighs 8 pounds. So, there's times where it's like, well, I probably only need 4 liters, but I better carry 6, because if I get to this water source and it's dry, I'm not going to have water. And then I think for each hiker, it's different. We have a couple of friends who they don't need water at all. Like, I got a buddy that he can go all day on a liter of water. And I drink a liter of water every 5 miles. Like, I just know that every 5 miles, I'm going to drink a liter of water. So I have to plan accordingly for my water capacity.
Yeah.
And then you get in a desert environment. I hiked through the Black Range in New Mexico in 2021, and we had 45-mile stretches without water. So we actually drove down ahead of time and we cached water for ourselves in certain places along the way by roads and stuff, so we would have water, because that's how essential it really is every day.
Wow. So the reason that the three of us met was because you guys are actually ambassadors for Sawyer. Sawyer is the company that makes the water filters that Impact Nations distributes around the world. And I was surprised to learn, I should have known this, I suppose, but Sawyer is a really big brand when it comes to hiking and camping and stuff like that. And I've seen some friends using that in a camping context, but I guess it's you just don't think about it, right? But although there are sources of water in the wild, you guys don't just trust those sources. Like, you're not just going to start drinking from a stream, but you treat that water. And I know a while back, a number of years ago, it was UV light and chlorine tabs and things like that. But Sawyer came on the scene, and I think actually in this book, Heather, you described when you first encountered the Sawyer filter. But how has that been a help to hikers and campers, having the Sawyer water filter available?
I think it's a bit of a game changer for water filtration. My first hike was in the late 90s, mid 90s, and at the time my water filter weighed 2.5 pounds. It was
wow.
It was literally this big. It had a big giant handle. It was a Catadine International. You'd be pumping water for 30 minutes to get enough water for your next leg. And then it was iodine. If that broke, your backup was iodine. We used iodine crystals forever. It's the fact that I drank iodine water for 5 months of my life could not have been good for me long term. No. And then it's then everyone, exactly. Then everyone's using bleach, and then it was chlorine dioxide. And it's when the Sawyer came on, it was not only was it really efficient, but it's there's nothing to break. I think that's the biggest thing with the Sawyer was besides making sure it doesn't freeze and making sure you back flush it, there's no moving parts to break. So it's been a really great system.
Yeah, it's totally revolutionized it. Yeah, those old filters with the pumping, you get an arm workout just getting a drink, you have to take breaks. At least I used to have to take breaks. And the Sawyer, it's you can just hang, you can set it up as a gravity system, like we do with the bucket filters that we just, you guys distribute, but you can do it with bags that Sawyer provides. So, you don't even have to it's not even hands-on, you just hang it in a tree, and like then your water is filtered. And it's also
While you
super
eat a
light.
snack.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's super lightweight, and I think that makes a huge difference too, because a lot of people were using the chemical treatments because of the weight, like the iodine and the chlorine. Because when you're backpacking, it's like, you don't want to carry anything that's heavier than you have to. And so, yeah, rather than carrying the big clunky filter, people would be like, oh, I'm just going to drink, throw 3 drops of bleach in this and drink it, like, which, yeah,
There's
like
also no,
Allgood was saying,
there's
just
also no
not
waiting.
healthy.
Yeah, there's also no waiting. I mean, all those chemical treatments, there's always this like delayed time. It's like the chlorine, like some of the chlorine tablets take like 5 hours.
Yeah.
And it's like when you're really thirsty and you get to a water source, you want to be able to drink. And the fact you can just like fill a water bottle and screw it on top of the water bottle if you are really that bad and just immediately get a drink is huge. I think that's a really huge thing about them.
Yeah. Less thinking, because you're already planning your entire day around water. And then you have to plan your day around rotating your water so that the chlorine can sit in there long enough. Like, okay, well, I filled this bag here, so I can drink that about halfway to the next water source. And then,
Yeah. So you guys got to see the water filter in an entirely different context when we were together in Uganda a couple of weeks ago. And I'd love to just get perhaps just your initial thoughts, reactions to what you saw in terms of people's water source in Uganda. We were in a couple of different contexts. We were in urban slums and we were out in a rural village. And in the same way that it hadn't occurred to me that hikers actually need to think about water filtration, I wonder what your first reactions were to seeing people's need for clean water in those environments.
I mean,
and maybe
I was
I'll start with
horrified
Heather.
at the water.
I
was horrified at the water that they were drinking. I mean, the reality is, most of the backcountry water that we would drink, hiking in the US looks clean. Like by and large, it's very clear. I mean, unless you're taking it from like a cattle tank or something, which you have to do a lot of times, like in the West, like in like New Mexico, Montana, Colorado, like that sort of thing. But by and large, like a lot of the streams. So really what you're doing is you're just, you're being extra cautious against, things that could be in the water. And then there's definitely times where I've definitely kind of turned up my nose at some water sources, like these cattle tanks, that I'm just like, oh, it's got algae in it. That's kind of gross. And like, it kind of smells funny. And then, you see like the water that people were drinking, that's literally just like, there's sewage running into it. And, some of the water that was in the village where it's just like, there's agricultural runoff that's coming into it. And it's just like, so like shocking and horrifying to me. I mean, I will never turn my nose up at any backcountry water that I ever encounter on trail again, having seen what I saw when we were in Uganda.
Allgood, what were your
For me,
thoughts?
I mean, I've been in the developing world quite a bit in my lifetime, the last 25 years. So initially I was like, oh, here we go again. But, even like when I worked in like rural China, I mean, they bought a lot of bottled water. And like you go to like Mexico, like central Mexico, those people are buying bottled water. And I think the biggest kind of surprise to me in Uganda was that was not the culture at all. I mean, I didn't see any of the Ugandan people were with buying bottled water. I mean, we bought bottled water, but they were not. So I mean, I think it's kind of one of those things. Yeah, I mean, you go there, it's like you're in that urban slum, and I mean, that was probably the biggest eye opener. It's like you're basically walking through like raw sewage. It's like, oh, and then there's like somebody right there getting water out of it. And you're just going, dude, that's not it. I mean, I think about those 2 kids that gave like those were balls and like they're down there like dunking them in the water and shoving them in their mouth, and I'm just like, oh no, what are you doing? So it was more incredible to me is like looking at that water, like especially when we were in Kampala in that slum, and knowing that that sewer filter is actually going to take that water and make it safe. I think that's like one big thing. And then I guess we're really fortunate. That day we were in the school in Lucca, and they have the big poster on the wall of like, these are the 4 different types of intestinal worms to look out for when you go to the bathroom. And I'm looking at that going, wow, like you don't hear about hookworm in the US, but like, in the turn of the century, 1910, hookworm was a major problem in the South, but we eradicated it. And here you are seeing these kids running around barefoot and, they have to worry about hookworm, and it's in their water sources. And it just really makes you realize like, how fortunate we really are, but also, how something so simple could just be so life-changing for all of them.
Yeah. You guys got a chance to talk to several people who had received a filter. We were there to chat with some folks who'd received a filter, and then also bring some more filters. We actually got to deliver the good news that that community, that rural community in Luca, was receiving 150 water filters to basically get clean water for the entire community, which was a lot of fun. But as you talked with people who were already using their filter, what was some of the feedback you were hearing just in terms of how is it impacting their lives?
I think for the children in particular, like you could tell how much joy and happiness that those mothers felt for their children be healthier, not having diarrhea, not missing school, or maybe the person who's going to work isn't missing work. I mean, it's having a major impact. And then also, how much money they're saving on charcoal and firewood and all of that just really makes you realize, like, probably a major part of those people's lives was focused on just trying to get clean water to have every day. And then hearing the health benefits, like, the kids don't cough as much because they drink water all day long. And they actually ask for water now. It's like, that's pretty remarkable.
It was interesting to hear, and to see like that these filters, like especially the people who already had them, that these were like prized possessions that they owned, and the care they took of them. And to me, that was kind of a stark contrast, because I feel like, in the US, hikers buy Sawyer filters for like they're like $30 or something retail. They're not expensive. And, hikers complain all the time about back flushing their filter and how it gets clogged and then it's kind of slow. And like, there's literally this like disposal mindset, like, well, this is, I'm never going to back flush it. I'm not going to take care of this thing. When it gets clogged, I'm just going to throw it out and buy a new one. And, I was kind of in my head just juxtaposing that mindset with like these people that we're giving these filters to, that are like cherishing them. It's like changing their life literally, and they're going to take such good care of them. They're going to last 10 to 15 years, and it just kind of like was such a like, you know, discrepancy between the two mindsets, and really very moving, I felt, to see how important this little piece of plastic was to these people.
Yeah. And just like the amount of that can like really impact their lives. I mean, talking to some of the people that, were with us, like doing our filming, they're telling me they spend like 25% of their income, their weekly income, to have bottled water for them and their family to not be sick. I mean, that's a huge amount of money for a country where people don't make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right.
And, to just think like that filter could, basically could really change an entire family's like economic outlook with just like that small filter. I think is quite humbling and really kind of eye-opening and astonishing too.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
The benefits go far beyond the immediate health benefits. There's this, rippling effect, economic and educational, just so many extra, things you don't think about that all come back to the ability to have clean water.
Yeah. And that's why I love doing clean water as a part of this holistic community transformation. And you guys got a little taste of some of our skills and business development stuff that's going on there. But yeah, if you don't bring clean water as well, then you're missing a huge chunk of the transformation that needs to happen. Yeah. Allgood, you have described just in our communications back and forth since there, but that this really was a life-changing trip for you. Can you just put some meat on those bones? Like how did your time in Uganda, and as you said, you've been in lots of places in the developing world, but how was your time in Uganda such that it kind of perhaps changed your worldview or something like that?
I think, part of it is probably my age and perspective that comes with being older. I mean, the first time I went to the developing world, I was 23 years old, and I was in Nicaragua and Panama for, 6 weeks. And, it was pretty eye-opening, and I think you're pretty idealistic, and then you come back, and a couple of years that kind of fades away as you're getting into your career and trying to make money and get a house and kind of chasing that American, materialism kind of, deal. And then, I worked in rural China in 2009, 2007, but, it's still different there too, because it's a much different culture and a different environment. And, there was access. People could get clean water if they really wanted it. It was kind of more like in certain areas, it's a little bit more of a choice. But in Uganda, I think the thing was, it's like just the people there that we met had so little, but were so giving.
Hmm.
And generally overall, I felt like had a pretty high level of like joy despite how hard life is. I think that really made me come home and be like, wow, there's really nothing in my life that's really that bad. I mean, I think that's like a big part of the life-changing thing. And then also I think just like realizing like how much the daily struggle there is just to, you know, just to live, just to get by, just to let your child, I mean, I don't have children, but I have a lot of friends with children. It's like, I know every single parent can tell you all you want for your child is what's better than you had in life. And, you would do anything for them. And it's like seeing how much those people's lives were changed from just like the simple act of clean water, to have such a positive effect on their children and themselves and what it means to them. I mean, that really touched me and really changed me, honestly. I think, we really get caught up in our own ways. I mean, I'm a business person, I'm in sales, it's like high pressure. It's like, and then just kind of take a step back and just realize like there's so many people in this world that have so little and it would just absolutely, kill to have the problems I have. They would love nothing more than to have the concerns I have, you
Yeah.
know. I think that really changed my perspective, especially at the age I'm at. I mean, kind of hitting, middle of your life, you start kind of reflecting on things. And yeah, I don't think it could have been a better time in my life to really humble me and make me really appreciate everything I have. But also, realize that, I mean, honestly, I mean, like we talked about, I'm not the most like, I don't practice religion, I'm a pretty spiritual person, but to also realize that, hey, I don't have to be like in that ilk to be able to go make a difference in the world. I think that really
Yeah.
changed my life too. Where like, I mean, I came home and honestly like looked at it, I was like, oh, maybe we should go do like a journey of compassion. My wife and I like, I mean, yeah, we're not religious people, but I mean, we believe there's something out there and we believe in making the world a better place. And, maybe that's, maybe a more active role in trying to make the world a better place is probably what I left with more than anything from there. Like, how can I take some of my time in my life now and dedicate it to making the world really a better place than just
Hmm.
hiking? I mean, hiking's great, but hiking's a very selfish activity. I think most people who've hiked more than one hike will tell you it's an extremely self-indulgent, selfish activity in some ways to be able to take the luxury of walking away from life for months at a time
Hmm.
and escaping. When it's easy to hide from everything else in the world when you're out in the woods, and it's like going there. I just feel like, well, maybe I should be taking more of an active role with some of my time off and travel money to make an impact somewhere else.
Yeah. Neat. Heather, I know you were, I'll use the word reluctant, perhaps, or unsure as you entered into this trip and about traveling with Impact Nations and weren't sure what you were going to encounter. What would you say to people having now been, on a trip with Impact Nations? What would you say to people who we've got a lot of listeners who are kind of on the fence, like, wow, it sounds really neat, but I don't know, maybe it's too scary or whatever. How would you respond to people who maybe aren't quite sure? What's it like to travel with Impact Nations and go engage in this type of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, a lot of my concerns were not necessarily unfounded. Like I was definitely concerned about germs, and there were a lot of them. We were in some really dirty places.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and I think that hiking kind of prepared me for this because hiking, you're always a certain level of uncomfortable and you just have to become comfortable being uncomfortable. Um, and I'd say that that's the thing is like going on this trip, a lot of it was uncomfortable, it's like you're, whatever, for whatever reason. But mainly at like a basic sensory level, like the rewards from being on the trip though made that a non-issue. Like I never really even
Mm.
thought about it, you know. Um, it was more just being, like I mentioned, like on trail, being present in this and like being there and, having these connections and interactions with the people, you don't really think about whether you're uncomfortable. And the reality is too, like, like Allgood was talking about, like you're seeing people who are dealing with far worse things than like I ever have had to deal with. And like, it's not, you're not living in it. You get to leave and go home. And so like the ability to actually go and make a difference and be uncomfortable for a little while, but change people's lives. I mean, it's way worth it. Like it makes it, yeah. Like if you have any doubts about going, just remember you're going to change people's lives. And you get to come back to your home and your clean water and your, nice food, and it's all only temporary.
It's only temporary. And I think we do our best to accommodate, what you encountered in the slum, Heather, was like, that's really hard, right? To see, and Allgood, you mentioned this earlier, just to see how people are living in that environment in terms of just the density of the population, there is indeed sewage just running through the street basically, and things like that. And yet I hope that we allow time to reflect on that, to absorb that, and then to take a break from it too, like to step away. Because I think, and I mean, what an incredible privilege we have to be able to step away. Because you're right, those folks go to bed there, and wake up the next morning in that very same place. But we have the opportunity to step back and get a shower, sometimes a warm shower, not always, but sometimes a hot shower.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah.
think warm is a
kinda
better description of a Ugandan shower at that.
Indeed,
I don't think hot never really seemed to be experienced there. Yeah.
No. And
No.
and sometimes even warm was a hoped
Yeah.
for reality. Yeah.
Warm.
Yeah. Indeed. Allgood, you mentioned this earlier, but I'd love to just circle back around to it one more time if you would. But
Yeah.
I know neither of you guys would in any way identify yourselves as religious. But I wonder if I don't know if your understanding of God or the way God relates to creation, to his creation, grew or changed, or maybe was just confirmed for you. I know you both have encountered the divine as you've been out in creation. And this was a very different experience of creation. It's not the beautiful snow-capped mountains of California, perhaps, but instead the urban slums of Uganda. But just how did you feel? Did it change your understanding of the divine, of God, of how he relates to creation during that time? And maybe, Anish, I'll start with you, because you do describe that in your book beautifully here, just in terms of your interaction with creation. And we talked about it earlier, but what was it like to interact with creation of a very different sort?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that I noticed throughout our time in Uganda was the nature that was still there, that's still present. Even in the slums, there's still nature in there. There is still that thread and that connection. And it, no matter where you go, even in, this dense slum, there is still nature, there is still creation, there is still that connection. And I've felt this a lot through my life and through the things that I've done and experienced. It's like that is something that will always connect us no matter what type of life we live or what we do. Our place in nature, our place in creation, that is a thread that connects us. And that was definitely reconfirmed in Uganda throughout like our time, out in the villages and even in the slum. But all of the ways that we are all still connected and interconnected through our place in nature was definitely reminded. I was reminded of that and reconfirmed.
Yeah. That's beautiful. In the least expected place, like an urban slum.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Even when you're least expecting it.
Yeah. Allgood, what was your experience of that, just in terms of interaction with creation, with a creator, with the divine, in these places you hadn't been before?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, there was a beauty in kind of the nature that persisted no matter what. But I think also the bigger thing for me that was more striking was just the people of Uganda and their faith in God and their belief that there is something better, and that I guess the biggest thing for me with like most religion is like I've always said, like, it does distill down any religion. At the end of the day, it all comes down to the golden rule, like treat other people the way you want to be treated, treat other people kindly. And that was really restored in Uganda. Even like seeing the
Mm.
kids out, those poor kids, I mean, with nothing, how they interact with each other and taking care of each other. And,
Mm.
probably one of the most impactful days was probably our first day there. And we went to the women's house with Annabelle and, met the women and their children. And, just kind of seeing, yeah, I mean, there was a creative thing there. And, they're spawning, they're caring for these lives that are, definitely not going to be easy, and they just still have a smile and they still have the belief. And so, I mean, that definitely touched me. But I think one thing I'd like to touch on too is, I mean, I kind of mentioned earlier, I mean, I definitely had some hesitation going on this trip just because, I mean, we live in a very divided world, especially in the US.
Mm.
And I mean, for lack of a better word, I'm like, somewhat of a godless heathen hippie, liberal hippie from Portland, Oregon. And oh, we're gonna go to this Christian group, and I'm like, man, like, are we gonna get along? Like, I mean, honestly, I had a lot of like concern. Like, I talked to
Mm.
some friends, and I think the biggest, like, one of the biggest takeaways I had after a week with all of you is like how those walls were tore down, and like
Mm.
you guys couldn't have been a better group of people to travel with. I mean, everyone, but like really, like the whole Impact Nations team, all of you, super accepting, super great conversations with like Ken about like my faith and religion and where I come from and what I believe in. And I never once felt like I was on man out or not respected. I felt like if anything, I felt like I was more respected and understood than I am with a lot of other people from all of you. And I just got
Mm.
to say, like, to anyone who maybe stumbles across this that would like to go do an Impact Nation, like a Journey of Compassion, is concerned about that, I would say that shouldn't be concerned at all, because honestly, all of you are just some of the kindest, most welcoming people I've ever been around. And that more than anything restored a lot of faith too for me at the end of that week, honestly. I told my wife as much and many a times. And, really, I've always said, like, one of my things in life is I feel like I can bring a lot of people together from different walks of life and tear down walls. And it was nice to see that again, even in this kind of situation. Because I mean, I've definitely torn down walls with like ranchers in Eastern Oregon, and I work in the logging industry, and I'm also like super liberal and believe in conservation. And it was nice to see that, at the end of the day, I think we all have the same common goal, like just to make the world a better place and believe in
Yep.
humanity. And that restored my faith, honestly, and probably God in the world more than anything was that kind of
Mm.
experience with all of you.
That's beautiful. Well, thanks, Allgood. I must confirm, we it just instantly gelled with you guys and just had so much fun. And I mean, just two incredible individuals who have so much experience and introducing me to new things, a whole new world that I didn't even know about in terms of hiking and all that stuff. And just the way you guys shared so generously of yourselves with us, like myself and the rest of the team, but also with those that you were encountering in those spaces. Just generosity of spirit that was really a lot of fun to be a part of, and just really blessed and encouraged me. So I'm
Yeah.
so glad that you guys were able to be with us, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Any other final thoughts? Any final or reflections on your time in Uganda, or anything like that?
I just am still blown away that the people with the least amount in life were just some of the friendliest, happiest, and most giving people I've ever been around. I mean,
Mm.
honestly, just the impact of that experience and those people will be with me forever the rest of my life.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was just a remarkable experience. I can't say enough great things about it. And I'm really appreciative that we got to go and be part of it with you guys. It was really, I feel honored to have got to go on that trip with all of you.
I'm so thankful you were with us. Heather, any final
Yeah.
thoughts?
Oh, very similar, just a lot of gratitude that I was able to go on this trip and have these experiences, and yeah, just see people that have so much joy and contentedness in their life. And like Allgood mentioned, like that are still like giving and generous, um, even without a lot. And it's
Yeah.
it's a good reminder that I can have in my day-to-day life,
Yeah.
to think about that.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, guys, I'm so thankful that we were able to hang out one more time here, albeit digitally. Thanks for sharing yourselves once again and sharing yourselves with our listeners. This is the part of the show where I always make sure that our guests get a chance to plug whatever they're working on. Heather, we'll start with you. For starters, you've written not just one, but two books, I believe. So people can find you Amazon or wherever books are sold, I suppose. I've always wanted to say wherever books are sold.
Yes, you can. You can also purchase them from me on my website, which is wordsfromthewild.net. If you want.
Wordsfromthewild.net.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And
And
I'm
are
also
you a
on.
social media of
Yep,
some
social media
kind?
is also Words from the Wild. Primarily, I do Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Very good. And are you sometimes I know you're on the speaking circuit and stuff like that. You announce those things on your website, I assume, and on social media when you
Yeah,
can be
they're on.
seen in the wild.
Yeah, yes, exactly. They're on my website, and also I have a newsletter, so you can sign up. The link for sign up is on my social media, but it's also on my website too. And I put it out in my monthly newsletter as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will link all of those things in the show notes. And then Allgood. You are
Yes.
a pretty fascinating business dude. You've got a company that you're VP at Six Moon Designs. You want to tell
Yes,
folks a little bit
sir.
about what you're doing there?
Yeah, Six Moon Designs is we started as an ultralight backpacking gear manufacturer 21 years ago, making tents that use your trekking poles instead of tent poles to save weight, and ultralight backpacks. We're kind of one of the first people commercially doing that. Since then, we've really grown the company quite a bit. We do a diverse product line. We have backpacking stuff. We have some everyday backpacks, umbrellas. I make a vast variety of umbrellas, great for traveling. And when in June, we'll be launching an entire travel line of product for adventure travel and trekking. So highly encourage you to check that out. Your listeners, if you're going to be maybe taking a journey of compassion, want to get yourself organized, we sell some great little packing pods.
Dude, yeah,
Bright
you
out in
showed
the
us
pack.
a new backpack you got coming out with those packing pods and everything. And Bill and I
Yeah,
were like, whoa, we need this. This is amazing. It's like
yeah.
perfect for a journey of compassion.
Totally, yeah. So yeah, check us out at sixmoondesigns.com. We're pretty active with our company on social media, both Instagram and Facebook. And then my hiking personally, I'm on Instagram at AGK9 Adventures, and the same on Facebook. I post infrequently. I'm trying to do it more frequently again in life after my kind of break. But I do a fair amount of travel for business around the world, and also backpack as part of my job. So come follow along. I try to keep it pretty above board and pretty honest. So yeah.
Yeah, and you are really plugged in the education community too, in terms of helping people become
Yeah.
campers and backpackers and stuff too. So if
Yeah.
you're brand new to the whole thing like me, Allgood's an awesome resource. So be sure to
Yeah.
follow
I
him.
would say if you're brand new, check out Alda West, which was the organization I was the president for 7 years. They do some great beginner backpack information. You can check out one of Anish's other books, which is all about trail nutrition and training. That's where
Mhm.
my other hiking partner, Salty, Katie Gerber. That's a great resource.
Nutrition. Heather's
Nutrition.
okay.
Well,
So
Katie wrote
She
about the
didn't do that
nutrition.
part.
which chapter's on
She
the
did the
Oreos? I need
exercise.
to know.
Hey, they're vegan, man. They're vegan. Come
They're
on.
vegan? Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
great.
Um, but yeah, I mean, definitely follow along there. But yeah, I mean, say those are great resources. And if anyone happens to be in Silver City, New Mexico in April 19th, I'll be speaking down there at Silver City for the Continental Trail Trail Days Festival. So come on by. We'll be talking about the Black Range in New Mexico that I was the last person to hike through before a catastrophic fire in 2021.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
You didn't light the fire, did you, Allgood?
I did not. I did
Okay.
not. I brought the proper stove, was very careful, very conscientious.
Good man.
Yeah. Yeah. I was out of the state when the fire started. Let's just get on the record right now.
There you go. Awesome. Well, my friends, this has been so much fun. Thank you for hanging out with us today. I know our listeners will have really enjoyed this episode. Folks, do be sure to check out both of these guys on all the links that we'll post in the show notes. If you're enjoying the Impact Nations podcast, be sure to tune in. We're every Thursday on what's the thing? YouTube. That's the one. At Impact Nations on YouTube. Subscribe, hit the bell. You know the deal. Yada yada. Or if you prefer audio, subscribe on any of your wherever podcasts are found. And subscribe so that the audio gets delivered right to your device every single week, so you can listen to that on your way to work. And please check out impactnations.com. If you want to learn specifically about the clean water stuff, you can just go to impactnations.com/water. It'll jump you straight to our clean water page and learn all about what the three of us were up to in Uganda. So thanks so much. God bless. Have a great week.